Welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. Please note, this episode is part one of a two-part interview. Welcome to another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. My name is Sendra Dorcé, and of course, I try to impress you every week with a new guest. This time, I have with me Christopher Casler, who is the director of America in Peril. I happen to be familiar with Christopher because he actually interviewed me for his film America in Peril, which I hope all of you will enjoy as I have. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about Christopher. Chris produced his first television documentary, AJ's film Now Is No More, in 1975. It explores how changing opportunities challenges the traditional value of a Black family in rural North Carolina. It featured at the American Film Institute at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., and it also aired nationwide on public television stations. Since then, Chris has produced and directed dozens of television program commercials, infomercials, including A Matter of Choice, a political documentary featuring Charlton Heston in the public service special It's a Bad Law, which the Washington Post praised in a front page story as a masterpiece of political imagery. Casler's feature film directing career began with Teenage Graffiti, distributed worldwide by Allies Artists. The movie was a commercial and critical success that grossed over 25 times its production cost. The Los Angeles Times wrote Director Casler displays a natural style and the ability to convey the shadings and nuances of small town life. He is able to capture a soft and everyday kind of beauty that's all the more special because of its unobtrusiveness. He previously wrote the screenplay for the comedy All in Fun and Treasure in Trail, as well as Shotgun Key, a film noir set in Florida Keys. He has also adapted novels to the screen, notably Alas, Babylon, Pat Frank's best-selling nuclear survival saga, and Leonard Rosen's environmental thriller based on the prediction of Nostradamus, It Came to Pass. Chris was a producer and the director of photography of There Really Is a Santa Claus, 60 Minutes legendary producer David Lowe Jr. created his whimsical program that proved conclusively that Santa Claus exists. It was hosted by Jack Perkins. Chris shot on location all over the US, including North Pole, Alaska. Furthermore, Mr. Lowe's wrote that Chris's remarkable talent is seen on the screen as the admiration of the crews that have worked for him. Now, Chris is based in Orlando. Chris has directed several multi-camera shows, including episodes of The Reppies, a children's series produced by North Star Entertainment that aired on PBS, in Out of the Blue, a teen sitcom produced in Orlando for Tribune Entertainment, and initially aired on WGN. Both series are two-camera shows taped on Florida locations in sound stages. As you can hear, a seasoned professional in the film industry. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Christopher Casler, who I would like him to tell you more about what I've just summarized, but in his own voice. And Chris, please fill in for the audience. What did I miss? What would you like them to most remember about you? So why don't you start with where this all began for you and what your journey has been like?
Well, where it all began? That's at least 5 years ago. Gosh, my father was a picture editor at the New York Herald Tribune, and so I got my interest in photography from him, and that's where I got my original creative input. So I started in still photography, and I still have the still photography business. I provide photographs for architects and all kinds of things, all kinds of clients. I've shot just about everything in the course of this career. And currently, I'm not sure about where I started so much as where I am, because what you've read is only up to date, but up till about 10 years ago. I apologize, I haven't had time to update it. I haven't actually used it very much, but in the last few years, I've done several other things. For one, I was co-owner of a football team called the Florida Crusaders, which was a minor league football team.
Nice.
We played in the Southeast Football League. Yeah, we did very well. In our first season, we won 7 out of 13 games, got into the playoffs. So that was a success. And part of the reason I did that was that we intended to make a reality television show about football. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we recorded it all, but we didn't ever sell the show. What turned out to be the case was that NFL has all the football on television locked up. It's very hard to crack into that game because they basically control it. But it was a great experience. We had 55 players. They were all young men who, well, one of them was 47 actually. He was our place kicker. We called him the Leprechaun. But so another episode in my career has been that for 2 years I was the executive director of Legal Immigrants for America, which is an organization that attempts to enlighten people about, first of all, the distinction between a legal and an illegal alien, which is a pretty significant distinction, but it's frequently not made in the media. They just lump everybody together, which works to the detriment of people who are legal immigrants who may often have gone to great lengths to become American citizens. And so they get lumped together with people who are basically jumping the fence. So I worked on that for 2 years with the Hansburgers, which was a great experience, and made a good number of videos for them, as a matter of fact, on these subjects that were connected to that. Things like H-1B abuse, the kind of arcane ways that people skirt the law in order to find their way into the United States. And in the case of H-1B abuse, they take jobs from Americans who are just as qualified, but the employers are finding ways to hire people who are being paid significantly less. And it's a kind of a scandal because, for example, with what Disney was doing, which is not something exceptional, Disney was doing what a lot of other companies do, but they fired 300 people.
Really?
They told them that, yeah, they replaced them with workers from India. And the people at Disney were told, well, you can stay on and train your replacement, or if you won't, then we're going to cut you off and you'll get no severance and no benefits. 300 people and their families were affected by this. This took place in 2016. So we were involved in that issue, and now it's becoming a bigger issue, and the president's paying attention. And so we're beginning to get some reforms to ensure that Americans are equally considered for these jobs, or perhaps they should be more equally considering. And so I was involved in that for a couple of years, and then I went and worked on the president's campaign. I was the vice chairman of the Osceola Committee in 2016. And I've been very involved in many other things. One of the things that has meant most to me is that my God-given talents are best applied to things that I think really matter, rather than just frivolous entertainment, which pays some bills. But this current film, for example, I think is one that has the opportunity or the possibility of making a difference.
Absolutely. When you wake up in the morning with that feeling of knowing your why, knowing you have a purpose, because there are 7+ billion people, but there's some things that only you can do. That's purpose, and I see that in the work that you've done. But you would continue, please.
No, I think that's true, and this film gave me the opportunity to bring all of this experience that I have, as well as my persuasion in terms of my patriotism and my feelings about the United States, into play all in one place. And so now we have this half-hour film, and we only formally released it yesterday, but all the responses have been astonishing just in the last few hours. And I know you've seen it. So what did you think of it?
I think it's phenomenal. I think it's heartfelt. I believe I see how passionate people are. I think it's a representation of a segment of the population that President Trump refers to as the silent majority. And these are people who currently do not have opportunities to express themselves, and you were able to capture that voice that so many people are not able to, think or speak so much out loud, especially in recent months with free speech being under attack in this country. What you've done is validated on what a lot of people are thinking and silently hoping that it can be expressed more and more. Your film is just the beginning of a movement, I believe.
Oh, well, thank you. So how did you like your part in it?
Well, of course, I was, I'm not being interviewed. So, but I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity because as you can tell, I'll give you the feedback that someone gave me. They said, because I have very close friends that, it's also my mother. She said that I sounded authentic and genuine, and I could tell. For me, and like you, it takes a journey to get to this point and to say, you get to a point where you say, my God, all of this has come to, all that I've gone through has come to this, and it's shaped and defined my thoughts, my opinions, my perspective of life. And, I hope that what we're doing is, and what I'm doing, hoping to do is, through my experience being from Haiti, and you heard me struggle with because French is still my first language. And so from Haiti and having seen what transpired in Haiti and having to look, I have to turn my back on Haiti because I have no control there. I'm an American citizen, and you shared about, people who have gone through certain steps to do it the legal way, and I'm one of those who did that.
What is happening in the United States? I've seen this on a smaller scale. The United States has more to lose. This is an example. If it can happen here, it will spread like wildfire, and it will happen everywhere. So I caution people when they think, oh, this cannot ever happen in the United States. Keep in mind that this is a land of immigrants coming from everywhere. Some of them like the United States, and some of them don't like the United States. There are people in this country who would love to see this country fail. There are people waiting to see this country on fire. So when I say that this can happen anywhere, what happened to Haiti, I'm not joking. Be careful.
But that said, I'm passionate about what you've done because I see what the consequences of bad governance can lead to. And that's Haiti right now. Haiti has the same history pretty much as the US as far as length, because we got our independence 200 years ago. So corruption is what got Haiti where it is now. That said, I was hoping, and I have been told that my message was authentic and genuine, and that's all I ever want to do. I never want to be the one coming with an agenda. I have no agenda other than the fact that the truth has to get out. And I think that's what your intentions are too, the truth behind it all. No rhetoric, no political, how can I say, talking points. But you, Christopher, tell me, at what point did you say, I've got to make this film? When was this fire in the belly? When was that awakened for you that this needed to happen?
This particular film?
This
Well, the executive producer you'll see credited on the film is a man named Ron Perry. Ron is an entrepreneur. He's now retired. He's also a pastor. He's a former executive with the IBM Corporation. Brilliant man. And starting in January, I was providing the video services for a series of his talks. He does a weekly talk. And initially in January and February and part of March, they were live. We were meeting at First Presbyterian Church downtown early in the morning, coffee and donuts or bagels. He would talk for 45 minutes, and then we'd have a quick Q&A, and that would be that. And I just recorded those as straightforward. Well, in March, we decided to go over to doing these things via Zoom. So I started recording those, taking them basically off the air, and then repackaging them, and then we put them out again on the Gatherings website. So the 13th of those talks was in August, and it was called To Save a Nation in Part 2. There had been a Part 1, of course, as well. And after that one, I felt strongly that we could take the essential concept and transform it into a documentary that we could then put out, as we just did. That's where it started, and that was episode 13, and we just did episode 21 this last Friday. So that was 8 weeks ago that I had that epiphany, if you will, and realized that this was an opportunity, or even more than an opportunity, it was a necessity to get this material out into the open and into a broader audience. Ron's talks are very interesting, but the audience is limited. And Zoom is great, but it's much more intellectual and academic than a documentary. And so I took the concept that he had presented and built on that, and his premise is based on the notion that the communists have been at work to undermine and destroy the United States for 100 years. I mean, and that's not just a supposition. It's actually, they publish it themselves. I mean, we're not making this up.
Written in 1961, he recorded and printed the major goals of the communist movement we see being achieved at an alarming pace today.
They started in 1920, and that was, 2.5 years after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And at that time, the Bolsheviks, or the communists, were very busy both in Europe and in North America to try to take over things. But in the course of it, in North America, they also discovered that they couldn't do it the same way that they had in Russia. They couldn't use the same paradigm. They have to do a different approach here, because in the United States, you can't say to people, well, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, because in our culture, our society, you could be the guy outside cutting my grass today and then come up with a brilliant idea and work hard, or go to night school, or do any number of different things and transform yourself into something quite different and make your life different and better. You're not restricted. You're not held down by classes, for example.
Right.
So what they've done in the United States is they've developed a race paradigm, so that we now have this notion that there's an overwhelming white majority that controls everything, and everybody else is a victim. And so those victims have all been brought into a coalition in an effort to overthrow the establishment.
Recurring theme, removing God out of the picture and making government the God. Black Lives Matter wants to do that. We've seen what government has done, how it's destroyed the black family, how it's destroyed black communities.
And this is kind of what the communists are using now to try to undermine America. And it's very unfortunate, because the people who are going to suffer the most if that succeeds are those people, the very people who are trying to further it. Sad, but true.
I'm sorry, this is what I don't understand, because of course, there's collusion between the deep state and the media, and the tech oligarchs. But I don't understand, most of the majority of them are white, and they have white children. I don't understand what's this legacy that they're leaving. I can't process that, because if you're pushing that paradigm, what is left for your children? Are your children going to be the victim now of the old victims? Because it's reversal.
No, your children are going to,
if you think about it,
your children are going to be they're going to be the ruling class. They're going to be the ruling class. This group is insulated from the rest of us. They have their own justice. If they look at all the people that we're finding out. Think about the people that are, at the top of the heap, and how they've been getting away with practically with murder. There's one set of laws for you and me, and another set of laws for them, and they fully think that's correct and proper. They know better how you and I should live than we do. And if we don't go along with the game, ultimately under communism, if we don't sign on, to their agenda, it's off to the gulag or the firing squad. This is how they operate.
So I want to focus more on what came through. I mean, some of the people that you selected to speak. Of course, you and I met when I was speaking at an event, but you already had identified, there were some random, participants, but there were also some targeted or some selected participants. For instance, you have, you had, I'm sorry, Candace Owen is one of those that you have a clip of in the film, and she's been very outspoken. Candace has made her, has pretty much devoted her life or her career to this, to exposing what she calls the radical left. And, of course, you have also the other talk show host that is on, that
Carl
is
Jackson.
The Answer. And I'm sorry, who?
Carl Jackson.
Yes, Carl Jackson. So how did you come about selecting those two? Because those were selected, before you had your interview with random, participants.
How did I go about choosing them?
Choosing them,
Is that
correct.
what you asked?
Yes.
Sorry, you're breaking up just a little bit. Well, first of all, let me back up one step. There were a number of interviews that I conducted early in the project to get the ball rolling. I interviewed Frank DiVerona, who is a Cuban American who's a survivor of the Bay of Pigs invasion. He's published, I think, 26 books on this stuff. He's very well known. Alex Newman, who's also a journalist and an author and a lecturer, very articulate. He's primarily, well, what I've heard, he speaks mostly on New World Order, the United Nations, and the corruption of our children through the educational system. He's widely. Trevor Loudon, who is a New Zealander, but who is very, very well versed in the communist movement worldwide, and particularly in this country. For instance, he's the one that will actually give you, if you want it, a list of 100 people in Congress who are communists. I know that sounds crazy and extreme, but he's got the list.
Look, I'm so outside that box. I'd have no friends. It's okay. I don't mind, because they all think I'm someone who's, focusing on conspiracy theories. But, I know too much. You can't go back once I'd rather be alone than be surrounded by people who are sleepwalking. But go ahead.
Well, and Candace was a perfect choice because, frankly, we wanted to discuss this question of how the Democrat Party, now that it's basically taken over by the Marxists, is using race instead of class as their way of injecting themselves into American life and institutions. And she's obviously an extraordinary, articulate, and well-known speaker on the subject. So she was a natural choice. And Carl, I've known him for quite a while, and I've spoken on his program. And I know how he feels about some of this stuff. And we actually had buttonholed him when I met you that same day. He was there. You may remember.
Yeah, of course, I have.
We had a short interview there, and after that, I wanted to have more. So I went to the radio station after he got off one night recently, and just interviewed him there in the studio. And so what he said essentially balanced and corroborated what Candace Owens had to say. So it was perfect. And I think that's an important message. And a lot of people aren't aware of this dynamic. They kind of sense it, but they don't have any real knowledge or understanding of it because it's not presented anywhere else.
No.
You don't see free media telling you the truth about BLM. They're not telling you. They're just it just isn't there. They're not telling you about any of this.
You have to have a work outside of the US in order to really understand what's transpiring. And for me, my experience outside of the US is what helped me define or understand better the US dynamic, if you can understand that. Living in the UK helped me see, break through that old paradigm of America-centric, but now it's what they taught me in school in the US. So I'm now able to see it through my own logic and my own thinking, because I went to business school in London. And so I know I didn't have people imposing their views on me as much. So, yeah. So I see the value of you interviewing these two, which is a very different experience, because again, I don't know if you understand the difference between, and I'm sure you do, the the blacks that come from the Caribbean and the blacks that come from the US, our stories are a bit different. Mine, I don't have personally a lot of experience with that, the civil rights. I don't have any experience with that really, other than what I learned in school, because Haiti, again, the independence was into 1804. So it's always interesting to hear Black Americans born and raised in this country for 2 or 3 generations have that perspective, which is very different than mine, because mine comes from, again, I don't have recent family members which were slaves. So it's very different. So go ahead. I wanted you to expand on that a bit more, on what they were sharing and how it was important for you to shape your message in the film.
Well, we had already produced, you may remember in the film, there are what we referred to in our process as modules. They're standalone pieces. They're 60 seconds. One of them is about BLM. Another one is about Antifa. Those were actually produced initially and released by themselves prior to this. They're out on YouTube. They're out on TikTok and Triller. They're devised in a way that presents the information and puts it out in a package that is quick and contemporary. It moves fast. The music is pounding, and we think that the younger audience is likely to pick up on it. Whereas a conventional documentary, which is essentially what the rest of the film is a little more measured and a little more considered. So we have both elements. But we had the Antifa and the BLM modules, and we wanted to find a way to introduce and bookend that. So the BLM module, for example, leads in with Candace Owens and Jackson, and then comes back with Candace Owens and Jackson. And so we balance that rapid fire presentation with what they have to say, which is extraordinarily articulate, obviously. And it's important. We didn't want this thing to look like it was, an older white guy with a point of view on communism.
Sure.
That's fine. I have that, but that's not the way we wanted to present it, because the story is much bigger than that.
Absolutely.
Much. Ron's premise was that Cleon Skousen had written a book called The Naked Communist, which lists 45 goals that the communists set out for themselves that had to be achieved in order to transform the country. Well, if you go down the list, it's surprising, but it's true. Almost every one of those things on that list has been done. Everything.
He said that there were 45 steps that would have to be followed before the nation became a communist country. And unfortunately, those 45 steps have been done in the United States of America.
And, some of it's been done a long time. I mean, one of the things on their list was, turn over the Panama Canal. It's now controlled by the Red Chinese. That's just one of the things on their list. Check that off. That was in 1979. So it goes back a long ways. And that's true of a number of other things on the list which have come to pass. But now we're in the final stages here of losing control of our country. Now you have foreign experience, as it were, and so do I. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I didn't think to mention it before. But my father was a foreign service officer, and his career was dedicated to fighting communism in other countries. We were stationed in Caracas, we were at Panama City, Saigon, Kuala Lumpur, Manila, and so forth. Not Manila, but Baguio. I grew up in an environment where we were at least as I was growing up, very aware of the communists in the environments where we lived. To me, riots are unfortunately not unusual. I saw riots in Panama and Caracas and Saigon and Kuala Lumpur. I mean, I've seen it. It happens, and frequently it's not spontaneous. The supposition, there's a bunch of students that just got browned off because they didn't like their coffee this morning. No, these are organized. This is all very carefully orchestrated and deliberate. And now it takes place and then it's presented to the public in another way. But it isn't at all spontaneous. It's very well controlled and deliberate. So my sensitivity to the subject comes out of my upbringing and my foreign experience, living overseas most of my growing up years. You know, but
Absolutely.
as you mentioned, if Americans had an opportunity to live in these countries, or at least visit them for a prolonged period and get a look at their own country from a distance, their whole perspective would change.
Absolutely. You know, the thing is, Haiti, you know, my father worked for, you know, the president. Most people would call him a dictator, you know, for Duke Papa Doc, you know, but Papa Doc was a strong man. And you know what? I would take Haiti under Papa Doc instead of what's happening in Haiti today. Because, you know, it's interesting, you know, everybody wants to be proud of their country. I used to be proud of Haiti once upon a time, but what I see now is unprecedented. So Papa Doc was one who stood up to communism. He did not have that vision. He did not share that vision when communism was spreading around the Caribbean and, you know, in Latin America. He would say, not on my watch. This is not the vision I have for this country. So communism never came to Haiti because of this leadership. And of course, people say, you know, he's a dictatorship. Well, they have no idea what that dictatorship would do, how that dictatorship protected them against communism. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, you know, what specifically the most important strategy that they have, these communists and socialists. And, you know, I don't even define them separately. I think that one and the same when you say communism and socialism. People say socialism is about entitlements and helping the people. No, it's about controlling the people, isn't it?
Well,
it's a black God and it's controlling the people.
It's a stage. I mean, Lenin and Stalin, they all mentioned it as a stage on the way. Socialism is, of course, the irony is that Americans don't understand that Nazis were essentially socialists too, right? National
Right.
Socialism, that's where the word comes from. It's all evil, frankly. Well, what was your question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, you keep going. The question was about the main strategy. So they organize riots, they organize, how can I say, uprisings. But it's deeper than that. We're talking about they have been planning this for generations. They have infiltrated the school system. I think that is their main strategy because they cannot do this unless they have vulnerable and weak minds. And of course, there are many adults walking among us who are vulnerable and weak-minded because they listen to the news and they absorb it and they accept it as fact. And I used to tell my mother who loves CNN, listen, but don't accept it. And of course, my mother was just like, well, it's being reported. And I said, well, yes, it's being reported, but you have to know that their angle is to make profits. So they first of all want to terrorize you. And then they want you to be glued to the TV so you can watch every day. So that's one strategy, accessing the adult. But deeper than that, we have the children that they are trying to corrupt into believing that they are victims. So now we have the black and white children who used to have, I grew up with white kids in school, but now there's this fear factor where white children or black children are now becoming more afraid of white children because they're saying, or they're bowing. So I want you to talk to me now about how they are actually preying on the school system, children, teenagers, even younger than that. What has been your experience? What do you see that they are, or is this really their main strategy to really go deep and take hold of the children?
Well, I think there are famous quotes from both Lenin and Hitler about how educating the children gives anybody who is an authoritarian, we won't use communism or socialism in there, but an authoritarian the opportunity to transform young minds and have them bend them, if you will, in the direction that the authoritarian would wish. And I don't think that's such a foreign idea. We've done the same thing, in a way that we think is beneficial, which I was very involved with Boy Scouts for 60 years. And, you know, boys who go through Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts become what we consider to be better citizens. We think that they make a contribution to their communities. We know they do. And so all that's worthwhile. And I think the concept holds, but if you take children and you teach them whether it's to hate capitalists or white people, or you know, in the Arab world, to teach every 4-year-old that his mission in life is to blow up bombs and kill Jews. Whatever you do, if you plant that early, you can create something that is very difficult to uproot. And we had in this country a number of things which enabled us to maintain our culture and further it. And we believe that we did it in a beneficial way. And I'll use Boy Scouts as an example, which they've managed to practically destroy now as a consequence of introducing homosexuality. And it was done in that case. People on the inside made the decision. I mean, it was a crazy thing because the Boy Scouts was immune from this. They're a private organization. They had a Supreme Court ruling that protected their right to determine who their members would be on any basis that they chose. And yet, you know, this Rex Tillerson, who was President Trump's first Secretary of State, was head of the Boy Scouts, and he initiated an effort to overturn that ruling and allow the homosexuals into the Scouts.
Really?
Now, what parent in his right mind, her right mind, is going to let her little boy go camping with an open homosexual scout leader in the woods? I'm sorry, it's insane. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's like Mad Magazine went out of business because they can't come up with stuff that's any more outrageous than reality anymore, you know? But I'm older than you, I think, and I remember when I was in 9th grade, our first semester English class was all based on the Bible as literature. And then the Supreme Court passed a ruling that you couldn't have prayer in schools, and that was the end of that. So we took prayer out of schools, took the Bible out of schools, and then gradually all of these other elements have been introduced into education, sex education. Now, I suppose at one point early on, sex education was about, you know, basic sexual hygiene. I don't know. I have not had that education. But I know that today they're teaching all kinds of perverted, obscene practices to children.
Yes.
I mean, it's outrageous what we've done. And we're basically taking young, malleable people and turning them into something that we would otherwise repel us if we knew what was going on. So then you end up with people in the streets of Portland, you know, with tattoos on their faces, you know, screaming obscenities at the police and throwing bricks through windows because I don't know what, because they're out of their whatever.
They're doing their job.
We've created this generation of difficult to deal with, shall we say, young people. And that's a consequence of the educational system. And that's buttressed with other things in the society, not just educational things, but cultural things.
All of the schools and universities have to become having communist professors teaching there. That also has been done. At the moment, the Black Lives Matter communist curriculum is being implemented right now.
For example, one of the objectives that Cleon Skousen put in his list was that arts should be undermined, that modern art should be ugly and imbalanced, and it is. I mean, I'm an artist. My wife's an artist, and we pay attention to these things. The stuff that they put in these museums is hideous. A lot of it is. I've got a photograph somewhere that the Museum of Art, well, not modern art, Orlando Museum of Art, in one of their recent shows, had a room full of cardboard boxes tipped up on their edges, arranged as a sculpture. It's like, what the hell? I mean, this is trash. What are you doing? You know, you couldn't call this art? No, seriously, this is very serious stuff. So, you know, we no longer consider beauty and beauty. I mean, where's beauty? Beauty is truth, beauty. That's what Percy Bysshe Shelley said. You know, if you create cacophonous music, you know, the kids across the street over here yesterday, I was washing my car. They got this thumpa, 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 and I can hear the swear words in the music. You know, it's like this is what they're listening to as entertainment. Obviously, we're affecting how they think and what they're going to do as a result of how they think with the music and the arts. And then, of course, there's always Hollywood. And today we have a story out that this Patricia Coulors, one of the founders of BLM, has just been given a production deal with Warner Brothers. It's wide open. They're going to be giving her money to produce programming that's consistent with the BLM philosophy. This is a major corporation.
I'm at a loss for words because it seems that we're losing this fight. But give me some hope here. What are the solutions to this? We've talked about the problem. We know that they seem to have their tentacles everywhere. They have their tentacles in Wall Street, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, school system, academia at every level, college, university, everywhere. Conservatives are being silenced on campus. We know all that is happening. And of course, the European Union has also bowed down to that whole concept of, BLM and how, even in England, the police are being, how can I say, humiliated. So what's the solution? What do we have? What's our defense? What's our offense? What can we do to halt this cancer?
Well, it may seem facile, but one thing is to pray, honestly. This country has, and I'm going to expand this concept a bit. This country was founded in 1620, or at least the settlers arrived in 1620. So it's been, 400 years so far. And in that period, there have been 3 internal wars in this country. Now, I'm including the English Civil War of the 1640s. So we were still part of England then, and so that is our war. It wasn't exactly fought in North America. So we can consider or not consider that. But in the interim, since then, we've had the revolution, which was huge, very serious, a lot of casualties, a lot of damage. And of course, out of that crucible was founded the United States of America. And then we had the Civil War, the American Civil War, which was an unfortunate necessity. Over 600,000 people died, which is a tremendous number of people considering that the population was only 15 million. So comparatively enormous losses. But in the process, we essentially restructured the Union and we did away with slavery. Now, whether people want to argue about whether or not the Civil War was fought over slavery, I don't know. But the fact is slavery was consequently outlawed. And that's ultimately a real benefit, I think, to everyone. Now, the reason I bring those up is that both the Civil War and the Revolution, the Revolution were preceded by awakenings in this country, major awakenings. Christian coming to faith. People had been in both periods. There had been tremendous amounts of corruption and disruption and disagreement, political strife, and internal conflict in the country. There were these awakenings, which took place in the 1750s and in the 1850s, and they preceded both conflicts. So the times prior to those events were also similar to our own. There were internal political conflicts, an unwillingness to compromise and get along, violence in the streets, and frankly, what we're seeing today is nowhere near as severe as it was then, really. It could get there, but it isn't yet. But out of both of those awakenings came the revolution and the Civil War, and ultimately peace and prosperity as a result. We may have to go through something like that.
We're going through a caterpillar moment. The caterpillar bursts out. It's in so much pain, it has to burst out of the cocoon. And then, of course, it becomes a butterfly. So at what point would this be the butterfly moment for the United States? Because we're still in pain in that cocoon. It's like that energy that's keeping us locked in. And literally because of the lockdown, right? So COVID has a lot to do with it. I think they had a playbook from the start and they were just waiting for the perfect opportunity. And this COVID situation has provided that opportunity.
It's provided it, yeah. I don't think it was manufactured intentionally, but I think it's provided it.
Yeah, of course. Everything is
You know, we've got people, you know, we know that you give people a badge and a gun and automatically they think that they're God and they start pushing people around. It's unfortunate, but it's a tendency. People given authority, people tend to exceed it. And we've been doing that for at least 20 years in this country, maybe longer, but go back to 9/11, at which point we instituted, you know, new laws for the Department of Homeland Security. We started widespread surveillance of Americans and their activities, although they keep denying it. We know that they've been tracking every phone call and text you, right?
Of course, the Patriot Act by Obama in 2011. My goodness, the fact that I would say probably 80% of Americans don't really understand what that means to be an American citizen and to be able to be subject to these type of these laws, you know, on American soil.
Well, there's that. And then, of course, on top of it, they've compounded it by providing military equipment to police departments. You know, meanwhile, the police departments who are so well equipped, we've seen them not do their duty, or what I would consider their duty. I didn't see them do their duty in Portland or Seattle. You know, I was in Los Angeles in 1992. I didn't see them do their duty then, frankly. The police stood back. I said, well, you know, the guys want to burn down their neighborhoods, we'll let them do it.
So this comes from the commissioners, this comes from the chiefs that are, because it's not the average police officer who's just going to step away from his duties. It's the people who are giving the orders who are asking them not to intervene, correct?
That's correct. But frequently.
So this is why, you know, now more than ever, we need to understand how important it is to elect at the local level the right people, because our safety are in local hands, not federal hands.
That's correct, which is why the president has been very reluctant to send in the federal government in any of these situations. It's not his jurisdiction.
Right.
It's just not. It'd be illegal and inappropriate. Now, we can use federal agents to defend federal property. That's another story. But we really, unless the governors request it, we can't use federal authority to quell a riot, for example. The problem is you wouldn't have the riots if the local administrations would assert themselves. Not very complicated, really.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Frankly Speaking with Sendra D on Sendor TV. Please subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when a new episode is uploaded. Also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, and we definitely appreciate you being part of this community.